Hey everyone! This week, to celebrate reaching 5,000 subscribers, I wanted to do a big project that someone requested, and I decided to make a car for stuffed animals. Now, even I underestimated how long this was going to take, so the car currently is not finished, but I first wanted to release a part 1 of this video where I show the basics of making this car. In part 2, I plan to go all out with the detailing, so this looks really good. There's a lot to do, so let's get started. Okay, I'm back to the room setup because I'm going to need a lot of room to do this, and I'm first going to take measurements of how big I want the car to be. So I have some stuffed animals arranged like they're sitting in a car, and I probably should have just done this for 2 stuffed animals, but I decided to make it a 5-seater. And so I got the inner length of the car to be about 18 inches and the width to be 16 inches. And then to measure the total length of the car, I got about 27 inches. And I measured up to this guy's arm to see how tall I wanted it to be, and I got 6 inches. Here is a little sketch of all the measurements I took to make it easier to follow. You can make this whatever size you want though. Okay, now to start cutting out the pieces for this car, I have this huge cardboard box that I've cut open. And I didn't end up using all of this, but just keep in mind you'll need a lot of cardboard if you decide to make it as big as I did. So I'm just drawing on those measurements I showed in the drawing. And this is going to be for the side of the car, so I'm just sketching out that car profile shape. And as you can see, I was really struggling with this. I don't think I left enough space in the front to make it really look like a normal car shape. So I was just trying my best, and at this point I also added a car door, which I knew I wasn't going to add a door. I was just trying to convince myself this looks like a car. Same with the windshield I drew on, that's not going to be out of cardboard. Next, I cut the shape out using a combination of scissors and a box cutter. If you're really young, make sure to ask an adult to help you with this if you're using the box cutter. And here is what it should look like in the end, and so now I'm going to trace this on another piece of cardboard so I can get the other side. After cutting out the second piece, I'm going to measure along this front curve up to where I want the hood to stop. For me, that was 10 inches, so that's how long I want the piece to be. But the width I already measured from before is going to be 16 inches, so I made a mark for that first, and then I'm going to do 10 inches long. It's kind of weird though because the width is longer than the length. I finally broke out my trusted cutting mat and ruler for this, and now I need to do the same thing for the back of the car. After measuring, I got 10 inches again, so these pieces are going to be exactly the same. Okay, next, to prep this piece to attach it to the other one, I'm going to start curving it along the shorter side. So luckily with the way I cut this out, the cardboard does naturally bend along that way since that's just where the corrugation goes. But this does take some time. I just bent each section little by little. Here is how curved you want this to be in the end because this is going to attach to the front of the car, which is curved. So now I'm going in with some duct tape and sticking these two pieces together. And you can go back and reinforce this with hot glue or something, but I think I just ended up doing all tape and it worked pretty well. This is the kind of coverage you want to go for, and now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. After doing the same thing to attach the back piece, here is what it looked like. I hadn't reinforced this with hot glue yet, so the edges had to be held together with a little tape. Now I'm going to step aside from that and get back to my normal setup to show how to make the axles for the wheels. You can use a really long wooden dowel or stick for this if you have it, but I didn't, so I'm going to be making a really long paper tube. And all I'm doing to make this is wrapping some recycled paper around a pen. And unfortunately it was really hard to get this pen out, but I eventually did. And I needed this to be around 20 inches long. That'll also leave me some extra. So I think I had to use about 3 pieces of paper, just kind of extending it off of the ends to make it longer. And I forgot to mention that this car I'm making is going to be able to roll on its wheels so I can push the stuffed animals back and forth. But if you just want the wheels for looks, you can just make the wheels and glue them on the sides of the car. You don't need to worry about this axle. Okay, so this one's pretty much done, and now I need to make one more, so I have 2. Next, I'm going to move on to making the wheels, and I'm first tracing something circular to be my pattern, and I'm actually going to cut out 8 of these because I want the wheels to be 2 layers of cardboard thick, but you could always just do 1. And then I need to make a hole in each of these, so I'm going to just start with 1 set, and I cut the same size circle out of paper so I could fold it and find the center point, and I'm using that to mark the center of the wheels, because if I just guessed where the centers were, it would definitely be a bumpy ride. This hole is going to have to be big enough to fit the axle, and the axle turned out bigger than I thought, so I had to make a little X with the X-Acto knife, and then use the scissors to kind of shape it in a circle. And then when you add the axle, the wheels should be able to spin freely like this. And also, my paper tube ended up being skinnier in some areas and thicker in the others, So for each set of wheels, I made sure they perfectly fit one end of each of the axles. Okay, next, to make these wheels even thicker than 2 layers of cardboard, I'm actually going to stick some pony beads in between, and that'll give them maybe an extra 1/4 inch of width. Obviously, real car tires are super thick, so I was trying. To make sure the holes were still aligned once I stuck them together, I put the axle through to make sure they were straight. Okay, after they've all dried, I finally labeled them, so I wrote numbers on each wheel, and this is going to be the back of the wheel, and on the matching end of the axle, I made sure to write the number inside as well, since the outside is going to eventually get painted. But now I'm going to start painting these wheels, and I'm first doing a circle in the middle of silver, and then having 5 lines going outward from that, and then one more ring around the outer edge. And this can be messy and thick because I'm going to do the black on top of this to clean everything up. So here's me doing the black parts in between. Here is what they look like when they're done. They kind of remind me of rolls of film. Now the last thing I'm going to do is cover this raw edge with a strip of black craft foam, since I happen to have some. So I'm first measuring it, and it was 13 inches around, and I want the foam to be a tiny bit thicker than the wheel. Now I'm gluing this on with some hot glue. And I guess I didn't really have to measure the length because I pretty much just cut it so it matched up exactly at the end. Now the last component I need for all of this is something to go on the outside of the wheel to hold it onto the axle, so I just cut out little circles of cardboard and am painting them silver. I also painted the ends of the axle silver since those are going to stick out a little bit, but I didn't realize that the middle of them would be visible on the inside of the car, so I probably should have painted them silver or black. After letting everything dry, I have everything I need to make this wheelbase, so now I'm going to go back to the car and make the holes where the wheels are going to go. I just put the wheel up to the car to see around where I wanted it for the front, and measured from the very bottom of the car so I could repeat the same thing on the other side. And I pretty much wanted to put this hole as close to the bottom as possible so the wheels would actually give the car some more height, so I made the mark 3/4 of an inch away from the bottom. Now I made the holes just like I did for the wheels, but it was kind of out of frame, but I'm just using my X-Acto knife to make an X and widening it into a circle from there. Okay, after making 4 holes total, I'm going to move on to making the seats. So I put my stuffed animal in to see how wide I needed the seats to be and how tall, and I settled on making them 6 inches deep and 12 inches tall. Since I'm making this out of a cardboard box, there's already tabs where the cardboard is folded, so I'm taking advantage of that and just having that be my seat shape. But now I need to cut it to size, so this should be about 16 inches wide, 12 inches tall, and I think I ended up cutting this shorter later, and 6 inches deep. So after cutting out 2, here's what they looked like. I ended up rounding the corners of the top part to make it look a little more like a seat, I guess. And now the last thing I'm going to cut out of cardboard before painting everything is going to be the dashboard. Unfortunately, my arm was kind of covering this, but I basically wanted to hang down about 4 inches. But to attach it, I want to add a fold to the top, so I added an extra inch, so it's 5 inches. And then the width again should be around 16 inches. I'm using my ruler to cut out a piece 5 inches wide. And then since I want to fold over 1 inch of the edge, I marked 1 inch from the side and used my X-Acto knife to cut along there, but I didn't go through all the layers, which allows me to really easily fold over that edge. Okay, so now I have all my big components ready, and now it's finally time to paint. I decided to go for a nice red convertible, so I'm painting the entire outside with craft paint. Spray paint would probably be a lot faster, but I didn't have any and I'm not really used to using it. Now, I'll admit I thought the painting would completely transform this cardboard, make it look like a shiny red car, but instead it looked like red cardboard, which I should have seen coming. But I'm hoping adding more details later will make it look realistic enough. I also painted the inside black, and I'll admit this took forever, especially since I was using the largest paintbrush I had, but it was still tiny. And I also painted the seats black, but I was running out of black paint, so I had to cover some of it with cardstock. Okay, I'll come back to the seats later, but now it is the next day, and this was filmed over like 4 days, so that's why my outfits are all different. But now I'm going to start adding the wheels. I first need to fit the axles into those holes I made, and since they were made out of paper, the ends were kind of delicate, so I had to really make sure those holes were big enough that it could fit through. But it can be a tight fit because these aren't going to be rotating at all, the wheels are going to be rotating around the axle. So after fitting both of those in, I can add on the wheels, and luckily I labeled everything so I know which ones go on. And like I said before, these should be loose enough that they can spin around. And now I'm going to press the wheel up against the car and then cut the end, and that'll leave enough space for the wheel to still rotate, while hopefully keeping it pretty straight. Then I can glue on the hubcap to keep it in there, making sure not to let the glue touch the wheel at all. Now I can do the same thing to all of the wheels. Okay, next, to make sure the axles don't rotate at all, I'm adding some glue around where it's attached. Now that is pretty much it for the wheel portion of this, and I tested it out and it can roll on its own, so that's a success. Will it drive straight? I'm not sure, but this is for a YouTube video, not a robotics competition. Okay, next I'm going to add the seats, and I only had enough cardstock to cover the top half, so the seat part is looking a little rough, but I'm going to add some more touch-ups later. But for now, I'm going to put these in place. And I originally wanted it to kind of rest on the axle, but I wasn't able to do that because they were a little bit low on the car and too far back. So I put them maybe 4 inches up from the bottom, but I made sure to look at it from the top first to see if that was a good height. Yes, I am using electrical tape to stick this on, which I'm not proud of, but I was afraid you'd kind of see the sticky part of the duct tape from the top, which ended up not being a problem. But I would definitely not recommend using electrical tape for this because these seats started sliding down pretty soon after. So I went in later with some hot glue and little cardboard supports. And I also used tape to hold that front seat up straight. Now that's pretty much it for the seats. I still do have to cover that back seat though. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to finish for this video is the dashboard. I'm going to have the steering wheel over on the left, but there's a lot of empty space on the right, so that's where I'm going to put a speedometer and fuel gauge. And I know there's a bunch of other stuff I could add, but I wanted to keep it simple. So I already cut out a piece of black construction paper that is pretty different from the black paint, so it'll still show up. And then I'm going to glue on 2 white circles, one big, one small, kind of overlapping in the middle. But first I'm tracing them so I could give them a black outline. And now I'm drawing on the numbers and stuff, but to give it some color, I'm adding a blue ring where the numbers are going to go. Also, if you wanted to make this more realistic, you could just print out a picture of an actual dashboard. But I like to do it all handmade, so I just drew one, and surprisingly, you get the idea when you look at it. And now one more thing I'm going to add is a green arrow on each side for the blinkers. And I know they're not both on at the same time, but I think it looked good like this. Then I just glued it on. Next, I'm going to make the steering wheel, and I'm going to make this out of that same thick black craft foam. But you could always make this out of cardboard or even maybe pipe cleaners. And so I'm first tracing something around to get the circle, and I used the box cutter to cut this out. Maybe I should use the X-Acto knife because I do have an X-Acto knife, but with really thick foam like this, it is hard to get that perfectly smooth curve. Then came the tricky part, which is cutting out little sections on the inside so it looks like a steering wheel. I tried to make it more realistic by doing 1 big and 2 smaller pieces. This was so rough though, I was not able to cut cleanly through this foam. But this was the best that I could do, and it does look like a steering wheel unless you turn it upside down like this. But let's not talk about that. I also cut out 3 little circles of foam to put behind this so the wheel isn't flat on the dashboard. Okay, now to attach the steering wheel, I'm going to be putting a screw through all these layers of foam. So I poked a needle through the steering wheel first, but I don't think that did anything. And by using a screw, I'll be able to turn the steering wheel, but you can always just glue it in place. And actually, I misspoke. I'm just using the screw to make the hole, and then I'm using a bolt to hold everything together. So a bolt isn't pointy at all at the end, but I'll be able to put a nut on the end to hold everything together. So after making a hole through the cardboard piece and all of the foam, I can just stack everything together and add a nut to the back side. Now the steering wheel is on and I can actually spin it as many times as I want. Now this is the last piece I'm going to add for part 1 of this video, and this is really easy to attach. I just added a long line of duct tape on that tab and stuck it in from the inside. And I wanted it to stay at a certain angle, so I'm taping it in place along the sides as well. Now that is all I have done for this car so far. I think it already looks really good and put together, but I'm not finished yet. I want to add a ton more detail in part 2 of this video. So make sure to watch out for that, and thank you again so much for helping me reach 5,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you for commenting or even just watching the videos, because I could not have made it this far without you all. I'll see you next time. Bye!